What's up, guys? I'm super stoked to share today's episode with you. I got to do an interview with the one and only Jesse Oxford, who is the founder of Ox Creates, which is a creative agency based out of Illinois, but they have offices now in Chicago, London, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Denver. They do some of the most amazing storytelling I've seen in my life, and for a long time have been one of my biggest inspirations as a storyteller. I first got to know Jesse when I went to Willow Creek Community Church in Barrington, Illinois when I was growing up. So I've known him for over 15 years. He was even my small group leader at the church at one point. He talks in this episode about his goal of working to build a brand and a company that lasts over 100 years. And consistently throughout my life, I've seen him make hard choices in his leadership to further that end. He's been an inspiration and a good friend for a long time. So it was really fun to see this conversation come together. Really, no matter what background you come from, I think there's a lot to take from this episode. So I'm really excited to share with you, and I'll just get right into it. This is my conversation with Jesse Oxford. You just got back from sabbatical. You were out in Europe for a few weeks, almost a month maybe, or maybe 2 months. How long was it?
Yeah, it was like from June 22nd to July 26th. Or actually the other way around, June 26th to July 22nd. So like 3 or 4 weeks.
Cool.
Yeah, something like that.
Cool. And this was like the first sabbatical that you've taken in how long?
I think like officially as a sabbatical for like a month.
Yeah.
And it was like my first sabbatical ever,
Yeah.
but I have taken vacations for like a month before. But I didn't think of it as a sabbatical. And the mindset is important.
Fact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have yet to take one myself. So definitely going to be due for one soon. But yeah, I just wanted to know. Oh, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Side note. Okay. So 22-year-old Jesse.
Yeah.
Just started his first job. Part of the job was we're going to go to this retreat center and have a day of solitude. And your mom, Mindy, was hosting it. And I was there, and it was all of these like grown adults there. And they were like, oh, I just can't wait. Just have like a day of just peace and solitude. We're not going to talk to anybody. We're just going to like walk the grounds, take in nature, walk a labyrinth, and reflect. And I'm sitting there in the back. I'm like, this is going to be the most horrible thing I've ever done in my life.
Why?
So like we did it for the whole day, and we got back, and then, everybody's like, so how was it? Tell me about your experience today. And I was like, all the adults kind of show these insightful things, and it gets to my turn. And I'm like, that was the worst. I'm like, what the crap? Like, I can't think of my thoughts for that long. I was like, I got stuff to do,
Yep. Yep.
And now, like all these years later, I was like, what I wouldn't give for a day to just like let my own thoughts bubble up to the surface and think about like whatever I want and not have to feel like there's all these like demands of my time. But it's just kind of like an interesting reflection on like how you change, but also just like what maturity looks like at different times in your life.
Yeah.
Because now I'm like, I totally get how like 22-year-old Jesse was pretty like pissed off with that. And
Oh
how
my gosh.
It was like frustrating. I'm like, let's have some friends. Let's go do something,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's almost like
anyway.
you played that 22-year-old Jesse who like couldn't sit still. It's like that Jesse was allowed to go run wild and live this crazy life that you've lived of traveling and storytelling and agency stuff and all that. And it's almost like you've gotten some of that out of your system now. And it's like, I think just from what I heard you share about your sabbatical earlier, it sounds like you're finally with some of these moments of slowing down, you're realizing like what your mind and your heart is capable of once you give it some of that space to breathe. So that's the first thing I just wanted to ask you about is like, once you did get that opportunity to go, run around on the Tour de France and sort of I guess it wasn't that many slow days out in Europe because you were running around chasing a race. But you had this huge shift in the rhythms of your life and what your days looked like. And I would just want to know if you've had any reflections then since then of what shifts you saw in yourself once you were able to slow down and how rest affected, what you discovered through that rest in your life.
Yeah, I think one of the things that my therapist talks about like that is like part of a sabbatical, and even like, having some conversations with him in advance of going on a sabbatical, being like, I'm a type A person. I like to be productive every day. I have like a lot of energy. Like what should like my goals be? on a sabbatical, should I have goals on that, or is that kind of counterintuitive? You know, like
Totally.
here's what I wanted to have accomplished this at the end of my sabbatical.
Yeah.
One of like the big things for me is like relinquishing the illusion of control. And I think like the root word of sabbatical is like Sabbath, and Sabbath is relinquishing, you know, just this illusion of control that like we have, that everything in life depends on us and our efforts. And if I'm not, you know, hustling after this, nothing good is going to happen out of it. So for me, like on the trip, one thing I was like really afraid of was one thing I feel like in control of is just how people perceive me. It's important to be like perceived of as like an expert or like a person who has knowledge that's worth speaking to, like an issue or something. But here I was going to a place where I didn't speak the language as well as I wanted to. I did like Duolingo for like a while to learn some French prior to I got there. But as soon as you get there, you realize I know nothing. Well, it wasn't nothing, but it was, yeah.
Well, French people are so intimidating too.
Yeah, I know. They're like, we have like a really strong culture that's been preserved for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I know everybody else speaks English, but we value what we have, and you should learn a little bit of that.
Yep.
So the thing that I had to relinquish each and every day was just feeling like, walking in feeling like a child and like a beginner everywhere, because like I wasn't able to walk in and be like, hey, I'm going to communicate in the same way that I'm able to in English, and you know that I run a creative agency and that's valuable. It's just like I'm just
Jesse,
white dude in there, and I could barely communicate. And so like that control was like a big shift for me, and so like in addition to it being like a culture shock, it was also just kind of like Jesse's state of being kind of shock. And having to live in those clothes for, 2-3 weeks for like a month. And so like being able to bring that back with me into my everyday life and just being comfortable being a little bit of an idiot, and that's okay. Like people like enjoy me for me, and even if I'm not walking in as like an expert in anywhere that I go, that's okay.
Yeah.
And I can feel comfortable with that, and people still like me.
Yeah.
So I think that need to like, to be in control, and when places I go, and to feel like I'm also in control of how people think about me by the way I communicate, the way I talk, was kind of like an important learning. And I think that like I'm able to go into new environments a bit more open-handedly, to just kind of say whatever comes at me, I can enjoy it, even if I'm not like 100% in control.
Yep.
And good things will still happen.
Yep. You had mentioned when we first talked about the sabbatical too, that like now coming back from the sabbatical, like your life looks pretty differently. Like Ox just went through this big shift where now Tony has stepped up as CEO. And what is your role now with the organization again?
Yeah, so I'm like chairman of like the board.
Okay.
So in terms of like being like the owner and to run the board, but on like a day-to-day level, I'm chief catalyst. So helping to like, any like new initiatives that need special energy in the company I can provide, but I'm also like in the creative a lot more than I used to be. I'm being able to direct a lot more films, as well as providing creative direction to projects. So, yeah,
I think it's just cool that shift came sort of right around your time of going on sabbatical. Like that just seems like really good timing to me. And you had just mentioned in our first chat that like you've just noticed the type of thinking and the type of ideas that come to you are kind of different now, because you're less in the trenches and you're less in like the super grindy parts of like owning an agency. And so it's sort of freed your mind to think a little bit more open-endedly. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that and know like what types of problems do you feel like rested Jesse brain is like really good at solving right now?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I struggled at for years being a creative and also like a business leader is the schedule and the way that it works. So like when you're like a leader in charge of like an agency as like a CEO or any type of manager, anytime there's like a crisis or need, you have to think about how to solve that. And there's like a lot of emails and communications and stuff like that involved. On the creative side, your like schedule on preferred lifestyle is a bit differently. So there's kind of like an article that was written a long time ago that talks about the difference between a manager's schedule and a maker's schedule. So a manager is able to do a lot of different tasks with like small amounts of time. So like, oh, I ended like a meeting 5 minutes early. I'm going to hop on email and fire off a few answers or Slack some people or text and solve this thing. So like small bits of time here and there are helpful and you can always use it. Like if you're like waiting at the train, you're on a flight. But for a creative, anything less than an hour and a half is pretty much useless because you're like, it takes me half an hour just to get my head in the game of like what I'm doing and to be like feel inspired.
So real.
You know, I'm like sit down, put my headphones on. I'm gonna listen to this music for a while. I'm like, now I can write this piece of poetry or this article or edit this video or come up with this new idea.
Yes.
So I always felt like I'm trying to protect my time of my creative mindset, and it keeps getting interrupted with everybody calling me about this stressful stuff. And then I might only talk to you for 5 minutes, but the 5 minutes that I talked actually put me in a really stressed out mindset because you're like, hey, you know, this person's mad about this. So what are we going to do? And I answer them. And then I'm trying to create and write this funny script. How can I do that? I'm like stressed out. So it always felt like this conflict, and I was trying to separate them. And so the way that I had managed that for years is if I can always start my day tackling the biggest creative problem of the day, before I check my email, before I get on Slack, before I have a meeting with anybody who's going to bring God knows what into my life and mind, then at least I feel like I've accomplished that creative thing and I don't have to worry about it anymore. And then the rest of the day I can do all that communication and management because I'm not compromising anything. Yeah. So now, having taken a bit of more of a step back out of the day-to-day leadership of the company, and I'm so grateful for Tony, just like great leader, great skills.
He's crazy.
Just excited for him, to be in that role. It allows me to plant myself a little bit more firmly in the creative kind of mindset. Yeah. Where I don't have that huge like ramp where it's like I need, half an hour to get my mind in this space because I can kind of stay there all day, which allows me, when people come to me with a creative problem, I can instantly just start ideating because I'm not trying to get my head out of that last client conversation that I had or, trying to figure out like how much to invoice for on this thing, and stuff like that. So,
to be honest, I was a little bit nervous. Like I started my creative agency doing like social media marketing just before, like about a couple months before I moved out to Hawaii. And I was really nervous coming out here that like, because a lot of my clients were still based on mainland and a lot of the people that I would be collaborating with were, that it was going to be kind of problematic only to have like a few hours that are really like good for collaborating. But I've honestly started to realize that like my mornings are like pretty meeting heavy, but then after like 1 p.m., it's like everyone on the mainland is going to go hang out with their friends and do everything else. And so I have like this huge chunk of hours, usually in the afternoon, where it's given my brain that exact same space to sort of just go idle for a little bit, like some of that stare out at the clouds time, to start to work on some of that stuff. And I've just realized like how necessary some of that time is and how actually, having a little bit of that margin towards the end of my day has been a huge game changer for me because I deeply struggle with that as well. Like if I have a hard conversation with my wife or a stressful conversation with a client or get an email that I wasn't expecting, it's crazy how much that can like affect your ability to think very freely.
Yeah, and you're like, I may as well just like close up shop for the day and come at it fresh in the morning because like I'm not going to do anything. You're like, I might be living on island time, but like all the mainland concerns keeps floating over towards me. I don't like that.
No, that's like real. That's actually a fact.
Yeah. You're like, you guys' speeds and like what you're demanding. I'm not sure how I feel about this. You should come over here. You should be on island time too.
Dude, I spent a lot of time trying to convince people to come out here. I promise I do. But honestly, Jesse, it's funny talking about this because I've told you this before. Like you've been one of the more influential people in my journey as a creative and how I think about doing creative work. And as I was thinking about this conversation coming up and just reflecting on like our relationship as a whole, I realized like one of the most impactful things I've heard you say, I don't know if it was directly in conversation with me or maybe it was something you wrote about on Medium, but you talked about how like a lot of people are good at being creative But you can't be professionally creative unless you can be creative when you don't feel like it. And I think I've just seen you over and over again be a proponent of like, hey, like I do this professionally. I've been paid, throughout my life to be a storyteller, to be an artist, to be creative. And most of the time that I'm doing that, I actually really don't feel like it. And I have to press through bad moods, and I have to press through like difficulties with clients. I have to press through all these things. And one of the questions I feel like I get personally asked a lot, since I'm like officially on this journey of like, I'm a creative, is like, how do you keep making social media posts when you don't feel like it? How do you keep writing blogs when you don't feel like it? How do you keep pressing forward and doing creative work when you don't feel like it? Because I think that's a question a lot of people are asking. And so I personally would love to just ask you as Jesse, like what have you found to be tools, resources, rhythms, mindsets that have been really helpful for you when you go through seasons of life where maybe you don't have a ton of energy, maybe you're feeling like you're just in a hard season of life? What tools do you use to get through a season of like that and continue to produce great work?
Yeah, well, there is for sure like a time and a place as like a creative to be like, I am an artist. Like, I want to be inspired. I'm going to come in and I'm going to bring like my unique point of view to this thing that the world has not seen. And this is going to be a masterpiece.
Yep.
And I'm going to make it. And like, I'm not going to take any notes or like revisions on this because I'm going to make it my way.
Yeah.
And like, I've got a perspective, and that's what I'm going to bring this as a creative artist. And as my friend Matt says, there are other times when you're a paid laborer and you just need to know, today I am paid to put in 8 hours of labor and work. And then I will put my pen down and then I will be done for the day.
Yeah.
So creativity needs to be able to happen both ways if you're going to be a professional. So there are days you wake up and you're inspired and you want to do it, and that's great. Like lightning strikes and it just feels like play. But then there are other times too, because like if you want to have consistent clients and get a consistent paycheck, you need to deliver on time, you know, because there's other things besides you in the world. And that's when it's helpful, as Matt said, to be like, I'm a paid laborer. I'm a highly skilled laborer, you know. It's not like anybody can do this. Like, you have a unique thing to bring, but also you're a skilled laborer. So let's like just get the job done. Yep. One of the first books that I read about creativity was a book called like The Creative Habit. It was by like a choreographer named Twyla Tharp. So she's done like a lot of really great New York, all kinds of modern dance and stuff like that. And you would think as like a dancer of like any artist and creative would be like feeling inspired is really important in the work. But Twyla Tharp says that creativity is a habit, and there are rituals that you can develop for yourself in order to be able to create all of the time, not just when you're in, Hawaii and you're looking out at the clouds and, you're having like fresh like experiences and good vibes. So to be able to kind of figure out what are the things that I need that kind of like help me put myself in the best position to be able to create and to do my job, and how can I order my world and my life to be able to like accomplish that. And then I'm going to do it like that way, like regularly every day. So writers, I'm not sure if it was Ernest Hemingway, but somebody like him, like just talk about, like I wake up every morning and I write 500 words. It doesn't matter if I think it's a good 500 or a trash 500. I'm just like, I sit here and I don't leave until I have 500 words. Yep. And that is like a discipline. And I think that like, there was like another thing that I saw the other day. I forget what it was. Anyway, like I believe in the power like of volume. So it can be like I've worked with like a lot of writers who I'm like, hey, like, where's your first draft? And they're like, I'm still thinking about it. I'll like wait. I'll send it to you. And I'm like, well, it's kind of like, okay, I'll give them a little bit more time. Yeah, they want it to be good. Yep. And then I'm like, they've had it done for a really long time. They just didn't feel like it was perfect yet. And so they like held on to it, for like a long time. Yeah. And the like fear of having to ship something because you don't feel like it's perfect, as opposed to like, I'm just going to create and I'm not going to worry so much about if I feel like it's perfect or it couldn't be improved. I'm just going to keep doing it. Yeah. that like ability to just kind of stay on schedule, to just create for volume instead of feeling like everything you have to feel like is your best thing, I think is very freeing, because one of the biggest things that contributes to like creative block is you having pressure on yourself that what you have to create has to be this masterpiece that has to stand for all of time. And when you lower your own standards, not like your own standards, but your own expectations of yourself, I find that sometimes creativity flows a lot more easily.
Yep.
So for example, when we were in Italy with Florence, just like the story of like a Michelangelo sculpture of David.
Yeah.
That's like the most famous sculpture basically of all time, I think. But when he was hired, it wasn't like, we're hiring you to sculpt the most famous sculpture of all time.
Totally. It was just a sculpture.
It was supposed to be on top of a building really far away.
Oh, interesting.
And nobody was supposed to see it.
I did not know that. That's
Yeah,
why they made
then
the junk so small.
Yeah, exactly. But they said like it was so good that they couldn't put it that high. They had to put it on the ground. And also like
that's so
the piece
cool.
of marble that he was working with, marble is supposed to be carved when it's fresh, when it's just been like pulled out of the quarry. And it had been sitting for 50 years. And like multiple other people had tried to carve it already.
Oh, interesting.
So he had a crappy piece of marble that other people had already messed with and like started. So he didn't have that many options. And it ends up at the end of it, like making this like sculpture that's forever. So I think like if you can release the pressure of yourself that I'm about to make something that has to be whatever, and like, I'm just going to do this because I need to. I think that like sometimes you uncover a masterpiece in the process because again, you weren't putting that pressure on yourself and just stuck with, I'm gonna make that.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, or do you want to ask it again in a different way? Maybe I'll be more precise about it.
No, it totally answered my question, and it just strikes a chord for me because I've always found it to be a really interesting question to ask. Like, what if I were to go into this creative process with the intention of making something bad? And like I've just always told myself, make bad art. Like, go ahead and like if you're gonna draw like a sketch, like go in with the intention of making something bad, because often it's like when you go in with this preconceived notion of like, I'm actually gonna try to go against what my creative intuition tells me, and just make something that it feels wrong and ugly. There's almost this crazy like space of creation that you can arrive to where you're sort of like setting aside all of your assumptions of like what makes something good. And I actually think that there's a lot of cool space for like innovation and for cool things to happen when you do that. Like even for me on social media, when I like started making things that I literally just thought were like kind of junk posts. Just because I was like, I want to get reps out of like creating these little short form videos. And one of them that I thought was like kind of the dumbest and the junkest went crazy, was like the craziest viral thing that's ever happened to me, and is the only reason I have like this big following on social media. And that didn't necessarily equate to like that much good in my life, but it was this really interesting thing of like, sometimes when you go into creativity with the intention of like, I'm almost just going to set aside my assumptions of what makes something good and just generate something, just make something, and you let all those things go. The type of stuff that you end up making ends up being more interesting than what it could have been if you had tried as hard as you can to make it this polished, perfect thing. You know what I'm saying? So I just love to tell people like, make bad stuff, man.
Yeah. Like the founder of Netflix in his book, That Will Never Work, says it's better to test 10 bad ideas than to like craft one perfect idea that takes you a really long time.
Yes.
So just keep testing small scale stuff, see what you learn, and build on that.
Yes.
Yeah. Instead of being like, I'm not going to ship this until like this like masterpiece is like made.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's so many people who kind of get stuck in almost like a freeze stress response when they like, they'll have this something inside of them that's like, I'm an artist, I'm a creative, and I want to make stuff, but they'll get stuck with like this idea of this finished product that they want to make. And because they don't necessarily know how to cross the bridge from like their skill level where they are to like this great piece of work they want to do, they just like never really get started. And I always just like to help people be like, hey, actually, like you're going to want to make about 500 to 1,000 really bad things first. And then eventually like that quantity will bleed into quality, but it's almost like quantity is the prerequisite to quality, right? And anyway,
Totally.
I could riff on this stuff forever because one of my big passions is like helping people who feel stuck in like they suck at creativity realize like, no, you just got to try. You just got to be brave enough to make stuff.
You just haven't sucked enough yet.
Literally.
So you just need to keep making sucky stuff, and then eventually it won't suck.
Yeah. You're here in like neutral, and you got to go here. You got to go into the pits first before you can go there. That's so real. Yeah. No, that totally answered my question. And I would love to shift actually our conversation a little bit more towards the leadership business side of your life too. It has a lot to do with creativity, but I would love to hear from your perspective what sort of the origin story of this whole agency that you've created is, because I've watched it since I was young. I think since I was like 16 or 17, I've known you and seen you building this thing. But I've never really gotten super the inside scoop on really what were the building blocks that you started to put together where you're like, okay, I think I might have an agency here. I might have a business to put together. And then once you sort of set that foundation, I'd love for you to sort of expand into the story of you discovering this concept of the 100-year business or the 100-year organization, and how you sort of decided, I want to actually build this thing that I've started to last, and I want it to be something that's more significant than just my life. That's a lot, but I would love to just hear you rant on all of it.
Yeah. Okay. So the way that I first gained the confidence to pursue starting my own company, wedding videos, where it all begins.
Oh yeah.
Because after me and my wife shot enough wedding videos, we looked at each other and we said, if we can make a bride happy, we can probably make anyone happy. And
True.
so then, like after that, I had like a staff of positions, like at a place, and I was doing like producing on like a weekly basis. But I took like a side gig like a summer to produce a 10 like video series on like a topic. It's really heavy and it feels kind of dark. So if I bring it up now, I think I'll bring the podcast down. So, but so like I produced that, or like I directed that. And even though I was awarded the contract, I think, how old was I? I was probably like 26 at the time.
Okay.
And it was like the budget for me, like at that time, was like a huge amount of money. And I'm like, I'm glad the client trusts me to make this creatively.
Yeah.
But I know just from like a skills production management standpoint, I don't have the skills or experience yet for this.
Sure.
So I hired like a few folks who were like decades older than me and had like a lot of experience in the industry to help to produce and manage. And I just kind of helped to share the creative vision.
Yeah.
And they helped to bring it to life. So that, like, even though I had that first opportunity, it still required people with other skills beyond what I had. And then being able to observe how they kind of handled that project and to work through the client end of things myself. At the end of it, I was like, I really enjoyed that. I'd like to do more of it. It's not that like I hate my day job creating where I had. It was just like I had worked there for 8 years. I was doing like a lot of the same things over and over again. I think that my skills were at a point that I was like, I think being able to step out into like some different water now could be good for me to give me some different experiences and continue to build. So I wasn't planning to start a business specifically. I just wanted to be able to have some more opportunities as a creative on my own and to work with like a broader set of clients doing more of what I had that experience for those 10 films at. So as I kind of started like out like on my own, it was just me for a few years, hired like some assistants, some other producers, like designers to start to work. And the joke I always tell is at some point I realized like if I get hit by a car, I still want everybody to still have jobs. So I need to structure it in a way that like it could like continue to survive without me if I was hit by a car. Yeah. So like at that point I wasn't thinking, oh, well, at a certain point I'm actually going to step like into a different role and not be the leader, but still could contribute creatively. And that's why I have to do it. The way I was thinking at the time was like, if I get hit by a bus. Yeah. So I haven't gotten hit by a bus yet, which is great.
Thank God.
So at that point, we started to build more of an agency model. And the cool thing about that is because other people have skills that are different from me, it allowed us to offer a broader range of clients than clients and to do a broader range of work and services than if it had just been built around my skill set the whole time.
Yeah.
So like, I think that that's one of the huge advantages of working with other people and trying to not build something only around yourself, because you'll constantly be the limiting element in what your agency or what your creative like effort is supposed to be.
Yeah. Instead
of it being about the collective set of the skills of the community together.
Yep.
Which I think is really important. Around 2019, I read an article about Japanese companies who have lasted for 1,000 years. And I was like, what?
Is that a
there
thing?
Are companies that are, yeah, they have a certain name in Japanese. I forget what the word is.
Are they like soy sauce companies or something?
I think some of them might be, but like the oldest one is a hotel.
Really?
So it's like, yeah, like hotels, like paper making.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of them is like in construction.
Okay.
So like they're family owned businesses that have been around for like 1,000 years. And I never knew that was possible. So
wow.
I started to read more like about their individual histories, other research. And then at a certain point I was like, I shouldn't hold such a high standard for 1,000-year-old companies. What about 100-year? Like that feels like a little bit more possible.
Yeah.
So I started to study that, and I was like, this is like a really cool idea. And like for me, I was like, a lot of these old companies are either family owned or they like operate in a way that's like more like family based and just how they like interact with everybody. And it's kind of funny now because everybody's like, don't call your business family. I'm like, they're not, because they're going to fire you.
That's been canceled.
At any order. It's been canceled. But I'm like, yeah, but like the ones that are old are families. So I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, I get the toxic end of things, and don't be throwing a word around flippantly.
Yeah.
If you aren't going to like commit to people. Also, the world is unpredictable, and just because you can't keep a promise of being employment from cradle to grave, it doesn't mean you're not family.
Yeah. Well, immediately for me, like,
but also
Ramsey,
like, anyway, so go ahead. Yeah.
Ramsey comes to mind, like Dave Ramsey's company, and then also like Chick-fil-A, which I know like is like I think those are both going to be companies that last a long time, but both of them, to my knowledge, are like fairly like legitimately like biologically family are like a big part of them. And then from what I know of their leadership styles, it is kind of like you're being professional, but at the same time you're fostering an environment that does in some ways resemble a family. Yeah.
So I get the toxic side of it, but I also get the side of it where it's like those old companies are family based. So like I saw that and I'm like, I'm a business owner, but actually I don't have any kids. Like I'm married, but I don't have kids. I'm like, so I'm not going to have anybody to like pass this on to or anything. So if I have a dream that's like this, for this to survive for a long time, and I know like loads of creative agencies that have existed for like 5, 10, 15 years and then just like folded, either because like the owner is like, all right, I've had enough of this. Yeah. Or just because it's like hard and like stuff happens in the market and in business, and you can't always sustain something indefinitely, no matter, how much you would want to. So like I was just asking for me, like, how would I make that like happen? And like, as I read and researched, I was like, that transition from the person who founded the company to that next like leader is super important. And because like a lot of times the company is too tightly like built around like one charismatic leader who was there at the beginning, and either they get canceled and then the business goes under, or like any leader after that somehow feels less than, or like is trying, everybody's like, yeah, but you're not doing it the way so-and-so did. And then it just kind of like starts to disintegrate. Like over time. I mean, we all had the same questions too, with like, what's going to happen to Apple after Steve Jobs?
Yeah, totally.
That's like an example, So for me, I was like, hey, like, I think I want Ox to survive for 100 years, and I can unpack a bit like why in a second. Sure. But I was like, in order for that to happen, I think for me to give it the best chances would be, instead of me waiting until the end of my life when I'm old and gray and grizzled and everybody's like, this guy hasn't known what he was doing, hasn't had a good idea in 20 years, and then I die or retire at that point, and then somebody else steps in. I was like, what if I did it at a time in my life that maybe you might say it's like too like early, like, like, Jesse, it looks kind of like you still have a few good years in you. Like, why are you quitting so early? Because I think to be able to be like along for the ride with like a number of leaders like into the future, to be like a sounding board, to help like support and to give confidence to like all of our clients and relationships in the meantime, I'm like, I think that would give Ox a better chance of survival than if I hung out on until the very end and then died and then immediately had to like figure out something else after that.
Totally.
So that's why I did what I did.
That's
now,
brilliant.
Why 100-year like a company? So today, I think that longevity feels like an anomaly. Like, why are you even thinking about 100 years? Because we've just seen like 2020, like the world changed and we can barely predict what's going on.
Yeah.
So like fast changes and new ideas have like shaken up industries and companies so many times that most of us are just focused on year to year survival, right? If I can just like have like make enough of a paycheck for this year to survive, to do this, I'll figure out what I'm going to do next when like I go there.
Yeah.
And I think that that's made it harder for leaders of purposeful businesses and creatives to focus on this old idea, and that's of like long-term impact. So like a recent study by McKinsey and Company found like a surprising trend, and that was like 90 years ago in 1935, the average lifespan of a U.S. company was, guess, like how long do you think the average company survived when in the 30s?
Ooh, in the 30s. I'm going to guess 15 years.
Okay. So the average lifespan of a U.S. company in 1935 was 90 years.
Whoa!
They were 90-year-old companies. Yeah. Wow. So in 2010, the average lifespan of a U.S. company is 14 years. So like, why is that? You know, were in the 30s, were they just exceptionally old and today is normal?
Yeah.
I actually think I think it's the opposite. I think a healthy, normal lifespan of a company is 100 years. And I think if a company dies at 14 or 15 years, I think it's premature. And I think the reason for that is a lot of us are just operating and thinking more short-sighted. And I don't think that it's necessarily like a character flaw or anything, but I do think that recently a lot of things in our world and society and even technology like innovate so quickly that we know like there's going to be like a new iPhone like every 2 months anyway. So like it just keeps kind of like shifting and changing.
Yeah.
So we don't step back because we are creating content that has to go out every single day. We're thinking about things real time. All of our DMs, chats, and all that has just kind of changed our perspective on what a long amount of time is.
Yeah.
And I want to dream a bit differently. So my goal is to build a 100-year-old company that endures, evolves, and is able to continually impact the world in a positive way for a long time.
Yeah.
And there are some changes that have to happen in the way that you think about your business that are kind of countercultural, but exciting to me.
Yeah. Well,
So.
You mentioned again, this is something that I love talking about with you the first time we chatted, but I want to hear more of your thoughts on like outside of just what you do as a leader and in your business, what have been the ways you've thought about like this 100-year dream as far as like just how you direct your personal life and what you do as just a human to take care of yourself with this goal of having a career that is investing in something that will way outlive you?
I think with just like stress, like, will I even remember this in 20 years? This thing that's keeping me upright right now.
Yeah.
What's the chance that I'll remember this in 20 years? Half the time, okay, so like probably one of the easiest things to stress me out on is if I pitch a creative concept and then I get feedback on it that I don't like. Okay?
Yeah.
So I've been pitching ideas for, I don't know, I've been pitching ideas for 20 years, you know?
Yeah.
And when I look back at like other, like even films and videos that I've like directed where I've gotten an editorial change that I'm like, dude, this is going to make this piece suck. Okay. When I go back and watch those edits, I don't even remember that anymore.
Wow.
I'm not there. Like I don't like see the thing that I wish I made.
Yep.
And it's not that.
Yeah.
Some recent ones I might, but for the most part, like I just remember it as it is.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to remind myself that like when I get these feedback things, it makes me like so angry and like want to punch the wall, or I'm just like sad or frustrated. I'm like, dude, just looking back at my own data that I've generated with all of these pitches, I can't even remember the concepts that weren't chosen that I wish they were, because I got stuck with this other one that I pitched instead. I'm like, all I remember is that one. And I'm like, I did the best I could, and I'm proud of it.
Yep.
So I've tried to release myself from the burden of having to feel anxiety or sadness or disappointment about things that I don't actually think I'll remember in 20 years.
Yep.
Now, 10 years ago, I didn't have as much data as I do now to believe that was actually, accurate.
Sure.
But one of the cool things about aging is you get more experience in your life. So I can confidently say, I'm not going to remember this, but it was a little bit harder when I was like 23.
Totally.
And it felt like the first thing that like I make is the only thing I'm ever going to make in my life.
Yeah.
And a lot of projects feel like that. So you feel the pressure to like make this be the best thing you've ever done, because you're never going to get another chance. And I know I've had 20 years of chances, so it's okay if I don't do it on this one, because I'll find another opportunity in the future.
Yeah.
So that like long-term thinking has kind of changed my approach to creative concepts and as I think about it.
Cool. You wrote an article recently about just how you actually believe that there's going to be this counter movement away from short form content into long form, or just a revaluing of long form content, which I think is in some ways a reflection of that longevity thinking that you've been doing. I wanted to pick your brain a little bit there of like what changes do you anticipate happening in the world of content in the next like 5 to 10 years? And what are sort of the things you've been taking note of and curious about, concerned about? What opportunities do you think are happening? What shifts do you see?
Yeah, well, I don't think this is really new, but I think it's one of like the early like indicators of like a shift towards like long form, is that like you'd prefer to be able to binge on something than just watch a movie of it.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I'm going to watch a movie and it's going to be over. But if there's this show and it's got like 7 seasons and you're like, I'm there.
Yep.
Yeah. That allows for deeper storytelling, like more character development. And I think people are excited about that. Yeah. There's more like lore involved with it because there's more opportunities to build that.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's an example of one of the early shifts to longer form content. And then I think it started to blur even more when you start to kind of like add those types of things with like in a short form platform, like a TikTok or, what have you in there, being able to take a piece of long content, but release it as like individual, like, bite-sized pieces, as you know.
Yeah.
Like as opposed to every post is completely different and unrelated.
Yep.
It helps you to go like a bit more deeper. And I think like the reason for that is people feel like they get to know you better.
Yeah.
Like you as a person, or if you're like an influencer or you have something important to say, or even like a character, you're able to build that relationship, even though you might not hang with the person like every day. It encourages that feeling.
Yeah.
A second thing I am excited about is being able to like develop ideas and content for IRL first and digital second.
Yeah.
Like I get excited about that because I think that because so much, I think of the arts and creativity is released like digitally, it kind of devalued it, where I feel like 10 years ago you were like excited for the next like new YouTube thing to be like released and stuff like that. But now there's like so much content like everywhere.
Yeah.
That I think that if it's only released in like a digital form, it's somehow not as like, I don't know, cool or real as if it was like,
Totally.
Hey, this is like an exclusive in real life experience. We're going to do a meetup at this place. And you might like create content while you're there and release it. But it's more for like FOMO of like, how you wish you were there because only the people who were there experienced it instead of like, anybody and their brother across the whole world can just like follow you.
Yeah.
Unless it's digital content behind a paywall or in a closed community or something like that. But that creates a bit more scarcity, where if it's just content being released on social all of the time.
Yep.
As we know, it's abundance. So I'm excited like just experiences that you can interact with in real life.
Yep.
And maybe digital is the afterthought.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about like how when you create a video for a brand or a company and you create like events around that and viewing opportunities or movie nights or whatever, how like they can be such a cool catalyst for in-person experiences, and even just like how it can be actually like a really bonding and connecting thing to just watch a great movie with a group of friends or something like that. And it just struck me that like there's almost no setting that I know of where there's like a large viewing of like a TikTok where like there's a huge audience sitting down and they're like on a movie theater screen scrolling through all these short form content pieces. It's just interesting to me that like short form almost inherently means you're watching it and experiencing it by yourself, whereas with long form there's a ton of opportunity for connecting with people in person around it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like from a sound standpoint, like being in a room and everybody laughs at the same time.
Yeah.
You know? Well, and just the joy as a content creator, like, I mean, the vast majority of stuff that like I make, I'm not in the room when somebody like watches it.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if they're responding the way that I think they are at the right time, unless it's at like an event or we're in a theater and we're all watching it together and you're like, I didn't even think that was funny, but everybody else laughed at the same time. And just, it adds that layer like on top of the experience instead of it just being like, watching and is sound off or is sound on and I'm alone, or maybe like two other people who can look around me at the same time.
Yeah.
Or even if you're doing a watch party or something and you might all be like in different living rooms, you know, you're watching it at the same time and you might be chatting. I don't know. There's still something special about being in the space together at the same time. So yeah, I like the idea of like being able to even like watch a bunch of TikToks or whatever together.
I know, that'd be an interesting experience. Like everyone come check out my algorithm.
Yeah. Well, and anyway, aren't you like when you're in the same room with everybody, don't the algorithms start to read off of what other people saw in the room anyway? Because you start seeing content that you would never see except for when your friends beside you.
Oh, is that a thing?
I do. I believe it. Yeah.
I've never even thought about that, but it would make sense. I mean,
yeah, watch how your algorithm changes when you're with a group and you start seeing like their stuff start showing up and like cross-pollinating your thing.
It wouldn't surprise me at all.
You were with them.
It wouldn't surprise me at all. Yeah, your phone knows you too dang well. That's wild. Yeah, you had this another piece from that Medium article you wrote that I loved is you have this strategy of social last, where it has a place in your strategy, and at Ox you guys consider it to be fundamental to helping brands and businesses tell their story, but you see it as almost the last step of the process of storytelling. Can you just explain a little bit about what you mean by that strategy and why it feels like that should come last in the process of all of it?
Yeah, so I felt like when pitching like ideas for campaigns, campaigns are inherently multi-platform.
Sure.
So the idea should, like be on Google Ads, billboards, public exhibitions, like email marketing, videos that roll on OTT, live experiences, like a company website. As I was pitching all of these things, I kept realizing that like clients would bring up first as either like questions or objections. How would this play on TikTok, Instagram, Meta, like any platform like that was like the first question.
Yeah.
And if it felt like it would land there, then the conversation would expand to other platforms after that.
Huh.
Okay.
Yep.
And so I started calling that like a social first mindset. So even though everybody in the room agreed that we were developing a campaign that was supposed to show up on like they call it like an omni-channel. It's supposed to work on like all channels.
Okay.
Even though we said it was an omni-channel campaign, really the first filter that if it's not a yes to social, it's a no to everything else. And if it was like an idea that like, dude, this would be like an amazing like long story or like a series of XYZ, like that the idea just wouldn't get made if it wasn't like a success on social. And based on like research and just people engaging more with long form content like than social, and like younger generations interacting differently with like social media than older generations do. Like, I mean, even like in that shift, like, you know, like the way we think, or that like me as like a millennial, the way I think about like a boomer who smokes, like, oh, that's like a health hazard. Like younger generations think of my social media usage in the same way. Like, can't you see how that's damaging to your mental health? The fact that you're like on this all of the time.
Yeah.
So for brands to succeed creatively, that like mindset shift is really important. Like, why would we base all of our campaigns around like smoking ads when it's like, we know it's bad for you, you know, like type thing.
Yeah.
So a shift to a social last mindset still includes social in the funnel, but it's not the first priority. And it would prioritize like other channels, like a community event where you can all be together in a room together, or streaming, or like, or other types of stuff. And I just think that approach allows for a more balanced, comprehensive marketing strategy, and ensures that your impactful content reaches a wider audience through diverse channels, as opposed to, if you aren't on social, you aren't going to see it anymore, because an increasing amount of people are like taking that out of their lives because they feel like it's a health hazard in the same way that previous generations thought about smoking.
Yeah, that's so real. I feel like in some ways you can see that same shift in our culture reflected in run clubs. Have you heard about all these run clubs that have just been like popping up everywhere?
Tell me more about a run club. I wanna hear about it. Yeah.
Well, it's this huge phenomenon right now where, in general, dating apps have seen like a decline in users. And if you ask most young people in cities, especially, how their experience is with dating apps, they're so over it. Most people are like, we just don't like it. I've been on so many bad dates. It just is weird. It doesn't feel natural. And there's this funny like counter movement that I think in some ways is bubbling up from run clubs, which are in some ways just glorified dating experiences that people go to, where even,
let's be honest,
for real, like if you're going to be honest,
fit people seeking fit people,
like 100%, like that's the joke. Every single run club, everyone kind of knows it's like a bunch of single hot people coming to run together and probably get a drink together.
Let's go.
Yeah, but I've been talking with some friends about this, and how I really do think there's a reflection of people starting to move away from, people just starting to recognize their need for in-person meeting and connecting, and how that is actually going to be much more valuable than online stuff. I think probably the church world is experiencing this too, that now that someone can get the best sermon and the best worship experience and all of it online from wherever they want, they're starting to realize the only real reason that I should go to a physical place on Sunday or any day of the week is to connect with people. And I just think in general that I really am encouraged and believe that there's this counter movement that's started by this same mindset you're talking about of like, don't you know, like smoking is bad for you? Don't you know social media and like the internet's kind of choking us out right now? I think there's this movement towards in-person and authentic connection that's happening. And I do think that like I said, long form content can be such a cool, opportunity to gather people and opportunity for those in-person experiences. So anyway, I'm a big believer in what you're talking about, and I totally see those trends as well. So I'm encouraged by that.
That's exciting.
Yeah. Jesse, we're like super out of time, and I wish I had like an hour for this last question. And so I guess you'll have to distill it into 3 minutes somehow, but
nice.
To you, I would just...
It'll be the Pappy Van Winkle of bourbons distilled into an answer.
This is gonna be
hopefully it's
absolute...
expensive and good.
Yes. Yeah, the mic drop. I've wanted to ask you, just, you've been someone who's mastered, in my mind, you've mastered the art of storytelling, and you're an unbelievably creative mind. And I just would be curious to know, through all your years of doing this, what do you feel like you've discovered to be the real reason that you love it, and the real reason that you find it to be like the most meaningful way to spend your life, telling stories and being an artist like that? Yeah.
Well, I was paying attention to what was happening with my face as you were asking that question. I was like, I got like a big smile. And I just like love the joy that like it brings me when I'm doing what I know I was like wired to do. And I think that thing is different for everyone. But like, yeah, I feel like I was like wired and made to be able to come up with creative solutions that, like, if they were implemented, would help to make the world better and solve problems that cause other people pain. And I love the idea that, like, me doing a thing that I enjoy doing and like being able to come up with ideas or solutions can reduce the pain of somebody else in the world makes me really happy. Because, like, I think a lot of times we think in order to make somebody else's pain go away, I have to take on pain myself. And like, I have to like move to a place that makes me uncomfortable, or I have to give away money that I would rather build or use to make like a renovation on my house. And I'm going to sacrifice that to go. And I think that there's like a sacrifice. And I think that that's good to a certain degree to like help to serve others to better their, like, we're willing to sacrifice our own. But I really love the idea of like, I can do something that I enjoy and I love and I would do for free for no money. And that can also help improve the life of somebody else. I think that's really, really cool. And that's what like makes me excited to wake up every day. Now, I don't always have sight of that because there are days when I have to create and it does cause me pain. But there are also times when like I do it where there's like joy involved. And yeah, to me that is meaningful, and I know that it's not me just creating art or having an idea for my own like a benefit, but I can see how it's changing the world I live in, and hopefully not just for my lifetime, but for like 100 years in the future, is really inspiring to me. And yeah,
same here, brother. Cool. Well, Jesse, dude, you have no idea how grateful I am that you took some time to be part of this conversation. And again, just want to reiterate, you've been a huge light to me in my journey of storytelling and creativity. And I'm just really grateful for who you are as a person. So thanks for taking your time today. And it's been a freaking great conversation, man. Would love to have one again.
Yeah, great
sometime.
questions, great conversation. Let's go.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Well, Jesse, have a great rest of your day. And thanks again for being here.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Bye.